Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Football season is upon us, thus we can don our hoodies and stay a little warmer here in the upper Midwest. It's still getting warm during the day, upper 70s, but it's cool in the morning now, which, I don't mind cooler temperatures. I don't love it cold, but I certainly do enjoy 60s and 70s for the most part, low 70s. Uh, if it's above 80, I want to be in the pool. That's it. Laying there, catching some sun, soaking up my creator. and I put that reference in next to the sun because the sun, Ra, whatever you want to call it, is kind of the creator of the solar system. And if we needed to have, excuse me, a finger to point somewhere as the progenitor of our species and this evolution here on this planet, certainly our star is a prime place to look. Those of you out there excited about James Webb Space Telescope, it's strangely not spoken of here very much in most circles. The average American couldn't tell you what that is, JWST. There are fans, at the gym. I bumped into one person who had a T-shirt of the honeycomb, and we talked for like 10 minutes, instant friendship, talking astronomy. And obviously, astronomy is probably one of the greatest sources for us to try to understand and grasp the concepts of meaning and purpose in this life. If the answers aren't out there, they aren't anywhere to be found. The cosmos, the unfolding, as it were, it does have a lot to teach us. JWST, the James Webb Space Telescope, for those of you unfamiliar, is the potential to really transform a lot of our philosophy, for lack of a better word. Like, it's going to change our science and our math and our physics. It's already seeing and peering deeper than we've ever conceived. And even in like test photos, things are showing up in the background with such clarity, it's shocking. And what Hubble did for astronomers 30 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been 30 years. Hubble's transformed so much. JWST has a chance to really up that ante and take us much further into our own comprehension of self and purpose and meaning and in this cosmos, this universe. I'm a big Carl Sagan guy. He sent me down on the path of my life in a lot of ways. It was the first philosophy that rang true with me as a young man. The church was always something I felt was very segregated and specialized in certain segments of the population. And why would any creator reveal himself only to one group? Especially when every group has a lot of the same morality. It seemed kind of silly to subscribe only one culture as being the chosen one. So I never really, even though I was raised very evangelical by my parents, it never really had a philosophy that I could get behind. What about the people that came to this planet before Christianity? Thousands of years. And there was never answers that were satisfying to me. From my parents, from theologists. There was too many holes and gaps in the theory that didn't account for science and modern understanding. And most of that philosophy comes from a world where we lived from river to hill. And we didn't really know what was beyond those hills or those mountains, and we don't really know what's beyond that body of water there. We have a pretty good idea what's in this. And often that world was 50 miles wide. When you're talking most of your life walking, maybe some horsebacking, 50 miles is a big universe to your philosophies. And it also confines and constricts how broad you can think and conceive of your potential beings. Again, the opposite of the society you're born into is the reality of all things, which is the amalgamation of every society that's ever been or will be. And possibly even societies beyond our own planet, who knows? But reality is much broader than the definition of one society's perceptions. And so many of us would define reality as the viewpoints of my society. And that's just very short-term, short-minded, history only takes a few pages before you start to go, well, there's more to how things are done than how my people have done it. And so JWST for me is one of the most exciting things and most newsworthy things that's happening in 2021-22. And the billions that were spent and the delays and all that, it's only led to a greater anticipation of the sequel to Hubble. And of course, they're very different telescopes. They look at very different bands of light. But the infrared is what really is going to set apart JWST. And it's just exciting. And every new bit of it is just absolutely thrilling. So I want to start a little fun little series here. We'll see how far I go with it. I got a lot of series kind of midstream with it. I'm going to tinker with some more. I'm trying to find a bit of a new formula. My views are down quite a bit, and I'm guessing part of that's my consternation with some of the audiophile crowd. and if I'm talking about you when I say what I say, I guess apologies, but I can't. They're not watching anymore anyway, and I can't really change how I feel about it. And I'm going to preface that by saying today's episode on a new series I'm going to call Hidden Classics. Records that are kind of out there but are kind of hidden between the cracks that have classic membership and just great lineups. And I was posted on one of my Facebook groups, jazz groups, the other day, and this fellow starts talking about the quality of the recording and comparing it to contemporary and Blue Note. And I often find the Blue Note comparisons kind of weird because Van Gelder was responsible for most of the Blue Note stuff. And he does Savoy, he does Verve, he does Prestige, some early Riversides. So his thumbprints on so many things. It's not like he was doing Blue Note magnitudes differently. There might have been some minor requests and changes from one session to the next, but he wasn't reconfiguring his studio from Tuesday to Wednesday to Friday based on what label was there recording. Again, the rehearsal time for the Blue Note guys is probably part of what makes the Blue Note records sound so good and not sloppy, which some Prestige stuff and even some Savoy jam sessions will sound less rehearsed, obviously. But again, not to belabor this point, but I've never listened to a record. The thought has never even entered my mind when listening to a record to think about the sonics and the acoustics and compare to another label or recording or whatever. And it's got to kind of diminish your enjoyment of the record. You're picking apart. And I just don't think there's a significant difference between United Artists and any other jazz label at the time. The analog equipment that was being used in recording studios in those days was usually 2-track tape. They were recording with the same microphones. I mean, there's going to be some techniques like Roy Dunan, and there was plenty of engineers who had skills, but it was a finite industry in those days. It wasn't like everyone in their basement had a recording studio. The equipment, the pieces, the machines were all huge, expensive, and to have a recording studio was the brand of professionals. And United Artists Films had the money to put the best equipment in. They had the money to hire the best engineers. And I ain't sitting here trying to argue about the sonics of this record versus it's not part of my process. I never sat there listening and thinking about that concept of, oh, how does this sound? I don't understand. I'm listening to the Curtis Fuller. I'm listening to Lee Morgan. I'm listening to the Benny Golson arrangements. I'm listening to the gospel-inflected Gigi Grice. So I'm always a little perplexed, not just by the critique of the sound, which I think is of minimal difference. And every studio has its own sound qualities. But it's just sitting there with that pen and paper with your monocle going, oh, this, okay, there's a little more room here. What about? I'm just listening to music. That's it. I get hung up on it. I do because I think you're not listening to the music. You're not listening to the record. You're listening to something different. And I think you're not enjoying the record as a byproduct of that. I mean, so without moving anywhere further down that road, today we're going to talk about Sliding Easy on United Artists by the great trombone player Curtis Fuller. It's actually a pretty tough record to come by nowadays. United Artists has two different sequences where jazz records appear, and this is in the 4000 mono, 5000 stereo series. Nice glossy cover. Probably 1959, 60 maybe, 59. They also had a 14,000 series, which is those black and white covers with like the Mingus, Ellington, Max. Like those records, that series is its own series at United Artists. But what you have here is three horn players from the Jazz Messengers: Curtis Fuller, Lee Morgan, and Hank Mobley. And I'm a big Mobley guy. Curtis Fuller is one of the great kind of slightly forgotten hard bop giants. And Lee Morgan, of course, is probably the most famous of those three, in part because it's Sidewinder, in part because people collect his old Blue Notes, which is obviously true for Mobley and for Curtis Fuller. But so you have quite the horn section of Jazz Messenger legend here, led by Phil Fuller at United Artists. And of course, he's playing with the Messengers, all three of them are. And this is Fuller's signing a contract with as a leader with United Artists. And he gets his horn playing buddies to come with him. And then you have Tommy Flanagan on the piano, which changes the context of this. It's not Walter Davis. It's not Horace Silver. I mean, it's a very different sounding, not Bobby Timmons. It's Tommy Flanagan. A different school, different era. Paul Chambers is on the bass, who is obviously omnipresent in jazz at this point. And the great Elvin Jones, before he's actually joined Coltrane. So the youngest Elvin Jones is the Jones brothers from Detroit, with his older brothers Hank and Thad. But and then you have the arrangements by Betty Golson and Gigi Grice. And of course, Golson was briefly a member of the Jazz Messengers as well, and Moaning, 59 in that same era. And Gigi Grice is one of the great composers and arrangers of this time frame, a great sax player in his own right. His records are fun and tough to find, with a lot of interesting gospel and blues and black experience. Like just he embodies a lot of blackness in his music, his culture, his history. It seems to really come through in a lot of what Gigi Grice is arranging and composing. So you have a lot of really famous people here in the hard bop East Coast scene at this time, on a West Coast film industry soundtrack label that does put some jazz out. And I think it's a great sounding recording myself. I don't have any issue with it. Again, I've never sat down and listened to it for that feedback. So maybe if I listen to it closer, but then I have to put something else on to compare it to, wouldn't I? So how am I even enjoying the record? I'm comparing its sonics. But maybe it's a compression thing, but compression wasn't then what it is today in music. But it's a great lineup regardless. And I think Flanagan changes the elements somewhat. And the first side of this record is a little bit more easy listening and a little more commercial in aspect, possibly somewhat by United Artists design. We're sure we'll record you guys, but we need to have a little bit more accessibility. Side two, they kind of open up the registers a little bit more. It starts out with a bit of Heaven. It's Curtis Fuller original. And it's a nice, and again, it's called Sliding Easy. Holy Morgan. Again, you have just a great horn section going there. It has a nice light swing to it. The next number is very interesting. It's called Down Home. Another Curtis Fuller original. It's gospel. And Horace Silver, of course, borrows from the gospel sound the Messengers do at times. and gospel, soul, jazz, blues. It's all from that same milieu, that same stew of life. They're all interwoven fabrics that you can borrow from at any time. And this is probably more gospel inflected than something you'd hear on a Jazz Messenger record. I mean, it's got a real hoedown tambourine over Morgan, but it's a language that they all speak fluently, and it's got a nice lilting swing to it. Again, it's slightly more easy listening and less intense than a Jazz Messenger record, and that's with Elvin Jones backing it. You know, Elvin Jones with Coltrane, but Elvin Jones' recording as a sideman for the most part. He was a very vibrant, dynamic player who had a lot of different colors, including pastels. With Coltrane, you mostly hear the brights, the intensities, with the dynamic diminishments and then bringing it back up. But he could do a lot of other sounds and textures as a drummer. He was much more varied than just the polyrhythms and attacks of the great Coltrane Quartet. But again, this gospel song, it really kind of gives it a bit more of a commercial feel, this record. This should be unoffensive to most of Americans in the late 50s, which again, a film studio's label that's mostly for soundtracks has to consider the racial connotations of their industry. And it's still true today in a lot of ways. Let me move on with a beautiful ballad here. It's the beautiful track, I Wonder Where Our Love Has Gone. And it's a Buddy Johnson, who I'm not sure, it's not Bud Johnson, I think, Buddy Johnson. Beautiful ballad. And there's room for Fuller here to really display some wonderful harmonics and beautiful melodic pulsations. And the bone can really sing. It's one of the things the bone does as good as any horn in the jazz lexicon. The bone can really sing. It's got that wonderful, syrupy, bendable tonation that allows it to really be human and moaning and has an empathy to it that the pronounced differentiation of a trumpet or a saxophone doesn't quite have that same slurring enunciation of a moaning bone. And when the bone wants to be melancholic, it really can reign supreme and take over. If you listen to some Ellington recordings, you'll hear some of the things the bone can do. It's a wonderful horn that sadly is falling into disuse at this time in jazz. You know, J.J. Johnson brought the trombone to bebop, and of course, great players like Curtis Fuller existed. You had the fantastic Jimmy Cleveland, who was one of the most dynamic, virtuistic players who didn't get much recording as a leader. A few things on Emerson, which are worth seeking out because he's just such an incredible player. But he shows up on side recordings to the tune of hundreds of times on people's records. And he does it into the 70s and 80s as one of the most proficient trombone players in the world. Jimmy Cleveland was a badass. And of course, Al Gray is also worthy of mention here because his tricks, kind of like a tricky Sam Netton, but his tricks were so fun. Al Gray really puts a fun twist on the bone, and other players before him had a lot of that same stuff. But Al Gray, I think, really has the benefit of modern studio recordings in the 50s and 60s to really record his punctuations. And he was with Basie's group for quite a while, Al Gray, and quite the character as well. I've come to know his son somewhat through the internet, and appreciate Richard. He's a great guy. Always enjoy talking with him. But this record has, like I said, it's a great lineup. It's somewhat buried in the jazz canon's lexicon because of its place on United Artists. It's hard to come by. It's fairly expensive when you do find it. It's not been part of all the Blue Note reissue programs. And we know now that if the people aren't reissuing it and YouTube ain't chattering about it, it almost doesn't exist to today's collector. Which, again, is a little infuriating for me. This is fantastic. This is Bongo Bop, Charlie Parker. It's just up tempo, bright. Again, probably still not something you would hear the jazz messengers do. It's fun. A certain amount of brevity and lightness to it, despite the dexterous nature of how you got to play it. You know, I think they're having fun, kind of riffing licks to each other, and it's really great setting for Mobley and Fuller and Morgan to be away from the intensity and rigidity that comes with a lot of the Jazz Messenger body of work. Then we move on to When the Lights Are Low, a nice track. Again, kind of a mellow, melancholy vibe to it. And we end the record off with CFA, I think it's called. CTA, sorry. It's a Jimmy Heath song, part of the great Philadelphia scene. Jimmy Heath was a great player. His brothers were also famous jazz musicians. CTA says here was created by Gigi Grice and arrangements by Benny Golson. So it's just a fantastic up-tempo number that's probably closest to what you hear from the Messengers. Definitely a hard bop number in the truest of senses there. So you have gospel, you have bebop, you have hard bop, you have ballads, you have the blues. You have the entire backstory of the black music experience in America on a record like this. It's a hidden classic. Again, to the sound critics out there, I don't have no problem with how it sounds to me. It sounds just fine. And I'm too busy listening to Curtis Fuller and Hank Mobley and Lee Morgan and Tommy Flanagan to even be thinking about that distraction. I like to enjoy my records when I listen to them, first of all. I mean, I put them on to enjoy them, to take them in, not to critique them. Fantastic stuff, though. And again, you can probably find it for $60, $80 nowadays. Is some of the stuff getting reissued? You tell me. I don't know. I haven't looked much online lately. I'm too busy with this coffee shop stuff. We're making some good progress. A lot of the interiors really coming together. We're working on painting the windows on the outside, which replace the sills on those front windows. Just been doing a lot of work, working 10, 12-hour days, but it's all helping me prepare myself for running the coffee shop as well. So things are good. We're blessed. This is the new Hidden Legends. I got some fun records to come in this series, and we hope that the viewership will go up for some of this stuff. I did a really good Clifford Brown, Max Roach, Sonny Rollins Throat Grabbers the other day. And even that one's only got like 600 views. I'm like, man, this is good stuff. I felt the spirit on that one. I recommend you go back and watch it if you haven't seen it. It's a fun breakdown of a great song and really illustrates the power of what jazz players are doing at times. So great stuff there as well. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you want to support the channel, go to my Patreon page and pledge a few dollars a month. Every little bit helps. Right now, it's always appreciated. It allows you to chat with me a little bit more one-on-one through messaging over there. Again, just enjoy the content. And if you don't like what I have to say with the audio file, excuse it. Ignore it, because there's still other valuable things to glean here talking about the music. Again, have a great day. Y'all be safe. Peace.